Can Bitcoin make you a millionaire? That's what we're going to talk about today. My belief is that Bitcoin absolutely can potentially make you a millionaire, and I'm going to share with you 3 reasons why I believe that's the case in this video today. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, this is Crypto Wealth. I believe in the future of cryptocurrency. I believe in this technology, and I believe that we are on the leading edge of a financial economic shift that is going to be far more extraordinary than most of us have ever experienced in our lifetime, and probably far more extraordinary than even our grandparents and our parents. If you believe that, do me a favor, smash that like button. YouTube doesn't like cryptocurrency content and it tries not to push it out there. So do me a favor, hit that like button. Let's rage against the machine. All right, thank you so much for being here. Let's get started. So the first things first, cryptocurrency, or Bitcoin specifically, because it's the #1 cryptocurrency out there. It has a full faith of essentially the blockchain. Most people trust Bitcoin over every other form of cryptocurrency. So right now it is the leader, no question about it. Let's just take a quick look at this over here at Coin Paprika. So we're over here, Bitcoin sitting at $16,000. Market cap was at 300 billion, where the next closest would be Ethereum at 53 billion. So there's a huge difference. In fact, if you start adding these up, Bitcoin market cap is probably bigger than the next 10 or so or more combined. I should add that up sometime and see how many of these basically it takes to equal 300 billion. But either way, so I believe that it will most likely be Bitcoin, at least the way that cryptocurrency markets look right now. It doesn't mean that there couldn't be something else or another cryptocurrency that couldn't rise up, but I truly believe at this point in time it's going to be Bitcoin that's going to be the solution of so many problems that we have in today's world. And we're talking about a worldwide international problem that's literally growing exponentially by the day, by the week, by the month, and especially by the year. So we're going to talk about that. First of all, this isn't... You can see proof of this all the time. This is a news story from today, or I guess it's from yesterday. U.S. piles up record October budget deficit of $284 billion. So the #1 issue that cryptocurrency, particularly Bitcoin, can fix or can solve is government spending gone crazy. Most people have no idea how government spending works, but the U.S. government doesn't actually have any money. They never have. In most countries, governments don't have but so much money. Some have a reserve, but the U.S. government does not have a reserve at all. In fact, the U.S. government is currently $27 trillion in debt. Here's what's crazy about this. This is growing at such a crazy rate. Just a couple of years ago when I was making videos and I would show this usdebtclock.org, back then we were like $22 trillion, and it is just growing like a speeding freight train. This is a problem. Why is this a problem? Because the U.S. government has to borrow money. They bring money in through tax revenues. They borrow money from other foreign entities, other foreign countries. Can you believe that? We'll get more into that a little bit more in this video a little later. But the problem with this situation here is they have to basically create more money or print more money. That's how they pay back their debts. This creates inflation. And inflation initially is almost not perceptible by the average person. Meaning, if you remember back, if you ever heard your grandparents talk about how cheap things were, when they were a kid, truly things weren't any cheaper when they were a kid. It's just that the dollar buys less now. One way to think about this is an ounce of gold 100 years ago would buy roughly the same thing that an ounce of gold would buy today. Think about that into perspective, roughly. However, the dollar's lost something like 95, 96% of its purchasing power in the past 100 years or so. And the reason that occurs is because of inflation. Now, typically this isn't a big deal. Inflation runs around 2%, 3% a year, depending on what source you look at and how you choose to calculate it. So typically it's really not even all that obvious that it occurs. But as inflation continues to occur, then it has to speed up over time. More because of debt and economic cycles, inflation continues to speed up. If governments continue to spend, and they're spending more money than they currently are able to bring in through their own exports, through their own literally gross domestic product is the best way to think about it. When you think about all the services provided by a country, the money that they raise or the money that they bring into that country, if their debt exceeds their gross domestic product, then what they have to do, they have to keep printing more money. And they literally are printing more money. It's almost like a Ponzi scheme. It's destined to fail at some point. But the way that it fails is through inflation. So what happens is the dollars that you have in your savings account become worth a lot less. The dollars that you earn on your job becomes worth a lot less. And sometimes this, again, it's not very obvious, but think for a minute. If you were to go to a fast food restaurant and get you a combo meal, and just to keep these numbers round, let's say it costs $5. Of course, it's probably more likely to be $10. We'll say $10. Let's say if you go and get a combo meal and it's $10, and then next year you go to get the same combo meal and now all of a sudden it's $11. Most people don't notice that. They're like, yeah, prices go up, so what? But what you don't realize is that means that across the board, if that sort of shift happens on most items in the grocery store, in the marketplace, at restaurants, on Amazon, that means that your dollar buys 10% less. That means that the inflation is happening really rapidly. And inflation historically has a trend of simply compounding on itself. Now let's talk about this right here. This chart here, US federal debt to GDP ratio. This is how much the debt is compared to GDP. Right now, our debt is 128%. 128% of our total GDP, meaning that we could never pay it all off at this very moment, without increasing our gross domestic product. But how the world do you do that? I mean, this isn't a small number. This is an enormous number. So let's talk about gross domestic product, just so we're on the same page, because as you start learning about finances and economics, you'll hear this. The total value of goods produced and services provided in a country during 1 year. Here's a graph showing you government spending and revenue. As you notice, it goes all the way back to 1792. Isn't that crazy? And for the better part of 1792 to 1810, basically, so what's that? Almost 20 years. Looks like it was pretty level for the most part. There's a big jump here, and it goes, there's a big spike here. But look, overall, what happens? It just gets faster and faster and faster. From 1918 to 2018, it doesn't even go further because I'm certain this thing would spike way up. From 2018, look at the increase here. Basically 100 years. I mean, and the spending just goes up, 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 and up. And you ask yourself, why does the government spend this way? Why do they go into debt like this? And by the way, where do they owe their debt to? Like, where do they get the money from? Because they don't get it from tax revenues. All of the taxes that come in are not enough to cover the U.S. government's debt. So where does it come from? What we don't make up as U.S. citizens in the U.S., it comes from foreign countries. Foreign countries hold a significant portion of our debt. The biggest holders of our debt is China and Japan. Now, why in the world would China and Japan, or China or Japan, why would they want to hold our debt? I want to go through this for just a moment, because it's important for you to understand that when you hear things on the news media, Donald Trump for a long time was talking about China and how China was taking advantage of the U.S., et cetera, et cetera. The crazy thing is the U.S. government literally needs China because of our current economic system. So one thing that I didn't mention that Bitcoin solves, one thing, it makes governments accountable for their own spending, because it creates what's called a sound financial or a sound fiscal policy or a sound monetary policy. And that simply means that the government cannot spend money they don't have. And I want to touch on that for a moment, because as citizens, we have to be aware of this. It's important to be aware of this. Every time there's an election, there's always talks of what spending they're not going to cut, or where they're going to increase spending. And if you look at this, you're like, wow, they almost need to cut spending across the board or something. Like, they've got to cut spending. How come the smartest people in the room don't realize this? They got to cut spending, because as citizens, we typically vote based on who's going to give us more or who's going to help our cause. Most often, that's how it works. I want to go through this short article here so you can get an idea of why would China want to own our debt. China's reduced its holdings of U.S. debt since 2011, when it held $1.3 trillion. It has taken steps to make its currency, the yuan, transition to a global currency. To do that, China has to loosen its peg to the dollar. That made the yuan more attractive to forex traders in global markets. China's economic growth has been slowing down since Donald Trump was elected president and began a trade war. As China's exports decline, it is less able to invest in U.S. treasuries. See, isn't that interesting? They're less able to invest in U.S. treasuries, but we kind of need them to lend us money. They're literally our second biggest lender. Meaning when Donald Trump or Joe Biden or the president or whoever talks about, hey, let's, we need a stimulus package. Everything's going on. We need more stimulus. Where do they get that money from? They're not getting it from its citizens because the citizens aren't currently working. They're not paying taxes. A lot of the businesses aren't paying taxes. They're out of business. Where are they getting it from? They're borrowing it. And in this case, the biggest two countries are China and Japan. Isn't that crazy? So when you get that stimulus check in the mail, just know that a sizable percentage of that stimulus check is made possible by China and Japan. That's crazy. So I didn't even mention this, but really the second reason, I'll say 1B, the second reason that Bitcoin can make you a millionaire is because it solves a major problem when you create a sound financial or sound fiscal system. And that is creating this kind of intermingling or entanglement among countries that may not be friendly to the U.S. government. I want to come down here for a minute. How China became one of the world's biggest banks. Okay. If China called in its debt holdings, what if they did not want to continue? What if they did not want to continue to borrow money? And what if, because the way they borrow money is they buy treasury bonds, which is basically, it's a promissory note, right? The U.S. government says, oh, we're going to pay this back plus a little bit of interest. Now, isn't that crazy? They're going to pay it back plus interest, but they're already not getting enough money in. Think about that. But how long would you borrow to, who would you lend, would you lend money to your Uncle Bob if he said he needed to borrow money, but he didn't have any way of paying you back? And maybe you would. Maybe you're like, well, I need to help out Uncle Bob. Okay. So if Uncle Bob comes back the second time and he hasn't paid you back the first time and he's like, hey, I need more money, would you still let him borrow money? At some point, you're going to say, I don't know if it's smart for me to keep letting him borrow money. At some point, these other countries like China are going to do the same thing. They don't have the ability to pay me back. So what if China started calling in its debt? Or what if they just stopped allowing or stopped lending at the same rate? What would happen? China's position as America's largest banker gives it some political leverage. It is responsible for the lowest interest rates. It is responsible for lower interest rates and cheap consumer goods. If it called in its debt, U.S. interest rates and prices would rise, slowing the U.S. economic growth, meaning could create a recession, maybe a depression. On the other hand, if China called in its debt, the demand for the dollar would plummet. The dollar collapse would disrupt international markets even more than the 2008 financial crisis. China's economy would suffer along with everyone else's. If China ever did call in its debt, it slowly would begin selling off its treasury holdings. Even at a slow pace, dollar demand would drop. That would hurt China's competitiveness by raising the yuan's value relative to the dollar. At some point, U.S. consumers would buy American products instead. China could start this process only after it further expanded its exports to other Asian countries and increased domestic demand. Now, here's what's interesting here. You always hear buy American. How come there's not more manufacturing jobs? You're seeing why right here. Because things are so cheap in China. Why are they so cheap in China? Because they keep buying our debt and they're using that to keep their own currency down, keeping it low. However, at some point, there becomes a problem. The problem is, okay, we cannot keep buying this debt if it looks like, in the next 3 years, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next 20 years, they might not be able to make their interest payments. China's debt holder strategy is working. China's low-cost competitive strategy worked. Its economy often grew more than 10% for the 3 decades before 2008 recession. In 2019, it grew at 6.1%, a more sustainable rate. China has become the largest economy in the world, outpacing the United States and the European Union. China also became the world's biggest exporter in 2009. China needs its growth to raise its low standard of living. For these reasons, expect China to continue to be one of the world's largest holders of U.S. debt. Not only will they probably continue for a little while longer, we desperately need it. However, at some point, this unravels. And if it doesn't unravel, it just hurts the average citizen, the average consumer. Why? Because they have to keep printing money. What happens is they keep printing money in the form of treasury bills, treasury notes. So they print this money and they use that to pull dollars from, in this case, China. China uses their own U.S. dollars to buy those treasury bills. But the U.S. government says, hey, we're going to pay you back this money you paid us, plus with interest. But again, the U.S. government doesn't have money. So what does it do? It essentially prints money to pay back its bills. It creates inflation. The bigger those bills get, the greater the deficit is, the more they have to print. And if it sounds crazy, ladies and gentlemen, it absolutely is crazy. No question about it. So cryptocurrency forces the government to be fiscally responsible, something like Bitcoin. And I believe there's no way around it, because I think at some point, as a citizen, your savings, your retirement account, all of it starts going down when it's delineated or when it holds US dollars. And you get hurt. That's who gets hurt. The average citizen on the street hurts. It kills your savings. It's like, what were you saving all these years for? And the other thing that it does is it hurts your job, and the raise you get on the job doesn't necessarily always have to outpace inflation. There's a lot of other economic issues that happen that can make it more difficult to get a job, the whole 9 yards. The challenge here is when it comes to cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, what it would do is it would force the government to make good on they would have to spend responsibly. They could not spend money they don't have. So for example, you'll hear a lot of political wavering that says, hey, we need to spend money because of this reason, and it sounds like a good reason. Healthcare is one. We need to spend more money on healthcare. We need to create universal healthcare. That's something that's getting tossed about in the US right now, right? Or Obamacare, which isn't quite universal healthcare, but you see stuff like that, which requires a lot of government spending to be able to create those policies. And you'll hear things like healthcare is a right, and I don't disagree with that, by the way. So I had a friend of mine, he said, why would you be against universal healthcare? And I said, it's not that I'm necessarily against it. The number one issue is, what if we couldn't afford it? And he said, naively, yes, but the government pays for it. We can always afford it. The government doesn't pay for it. The government takes it from you and me in taxes, which is fine as long as the tax revenue covered the cost. But the tax revenue doesn't cover the costs. And if it doesn't, they can't just not give people their health care. Or they would be forced to do that in an environment where they had to have sound policy. They would have to think about what they were committing to long term. And they wouldn't be able to manipulate the voter through promises that they can't keep financially. That goes down a whole bunny trail, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm not going to take us down that bunny trail. The second major thing that Bitcoin would do, in theory, there are ways around this, but in theory, in a true sound economic system, it would prevent fractional reserve lending. What is fractional reserve lending? Fractional reserve lending is essentially where the bank, if you deposit $100 in the bank, they can loan that $100 out basically 9 times. I know that sounds crazy. And you think, but well, how can they, I only gave them $100. They can only lend back out my $100 and pay me interest. No, they pay you a little bit of interest on that $100, not even enough to keep up with inflation. By law, they're allowed to lend that $100 out up to 9 times. So it literally, by you giving them $100 on deposit, you've given them the ability, and I'm oversimplifying this, but you've given them the ability to lend out $900 and collect interest on those loans. Think about that. And it gets even crazier because there's another way where those loans actually give them the ability in some cases to make further loans, and it's really a compound effect. It's kind of a Ponzi scheme. It's borrowing on top of borrowing on top of borrowing. And the money's not there should you choose. If everybody at once wanted to go withdraw money from the bank, the money's not there. It never has been. Most people don't know this. It never has been there. Listen, fractional reserve banking is a system in which only a fraction of bank deposits are backed by actual cash on hand and available for withdrawal. This is done theoretically to expand the economy by freeing capital for lending. First of all, this is a play on words. This is done theoretically to expand the economy by creating money out of thin air and creating the illusion of sound money. Like most people think that the bank lends you money, they're lending you money from their profits. They're not lending you money from their profits. They're literally lending you money that they actually don't have. Key takeaway, banks are required to keep on hand a certain amount of the cash that depositors give them, but banks are not required to keep the entire amount on hand. Most banks are required to keep 10% of the deposit, referred to as reserves. Some banks are exempt from holding reserves, but all banks are paid a rate of interest on reserves. Understanding fractional reserve banking, banks are required to keep on hand and withdraw and available for withdrawal a certain amount of the cash that depositors give them. If someone deposits $100, the bank can lend out the entire amount. Nor are banks required to keep the entire amount on hand. Most are required to keep 10% of the deposit, referred to as reserves. This requirement is set by the Federal Reserve and is one of the central bank's tools to implement monetary policy. Increasing the reserve requirement takes money out of the economy, while decreasing the reserve requirement puts money back into the economy. By the way, they've not increased the reserve requirement in a very long time. They actually have only decreased it. So fractional reserve banking has pros and cons. It permits banks to use funds, the bulk of deposits, that would be otherwise unused to generate returns in the form of interest rates on loans, and to make more money available to grow the economy. This is so ridiculous right here. What they do is they really make more money available to earn profits from. That's really, think about that. Could you imagine owning a business where you can give out something that you actually don't have to give out? Isn't that crazy? It is, however, it also, however, could catch a bank short in the self-perpetuating panic of a bank run. Many U.S. banks were forced to shut down during the Great Depression because too many customers attempted to withdraw assets at the same time. Nevertheless, fractional reserve banking is an accepted business practice that is used in banks worldwide. So, the problem with this system, more than anything else, is when these banks get into trouble, you would think they would go out of business. But in recent history, the U.S. government bail out the banks, and they bail out the banks claiming that it's too big of a systemic risk. If a major bank collapses, that collapse could basically echo throughout the entire system, and it could lead to another bank collapse and another bank collapse, or another government, local government or whatever, to collapse. This is a problem. And so how do they solve it? How do they bail these banks out? They borrow more money. It's basically going back to government spending. Fractional reserve banking is a Ponzi scheme right now that historically relies upon the government at this moment bailing them out. And that is where it just continues to contribute to inflation, inflating away your savings. So Bitcoin is this system cannot go on indefinitely. It's not going to go on indefinitely. It never has succeeded indefinitely in the history of the world. Understand, fractional reserve banking has occurred many times through history, but it's never ever succeeded in forever. Fractional reserve banking could exist if the government already had some. It could exist if the government had sound financial policies, sound fiscal policies. Because the real issue here is the government spending to bail out the banks. Of course, they would have to allow banks to fail in some instances in order to keep that sound government policy, but that would still protect the average consumer. It wouldn't inflate away their savings. This is a problem. And I believe that consumers ultimately around the world, citizens around the world, are going to lose faith in the banking system over time. Or they're going to become aware of inflation and want to protect their savings. The only way to truly protect your savings is to own some sort of store of value. Historically, real estate and precious metals like gold and silver have been the solution to this. But a better solution, a more portable solution, and in some ways an easier solution to secure and protect is cryptocurrency. Primarily, we're talking Bitcoin. So Bitcoin's quickly becoming a bit of a store of value. I've done a couple of videos in the past month on my channel about that. It's quickly becoming a store of value. It's becoming a hedge. Many people are aware of this, but more and more people are starting to actually use it. And we're beginning to see even an older segment of our population becoming aware of it and starting to use it. That's incredible. People are now using Bitcoin in small amounts through things like the Grayscale Trust to be able to hold in their savings account. Even people in my own family, some of my own friends understand that I'm involved in crypto. I have gotten probably 3 different people in the past month talk to me about, can you hold cryptocurrency in a retirement account? Should they hedge some of their income with cryptocurrency, et cetera, et cetera. And I always tell people, first, pay off your debt. Stuff like I always say, pay off your debt. I say, buy a rental property. That's always a good thing to do. But not everybody can buy a rental property. You can easily buy $25, $50, $100 worth of Bitcoin. And if you're going to do it, I always tell them the dollar cost average. There's no way that we're not moving towards a decentralized cryptocurrency. In my opinion, none of this is investment advice. This is just my commentary. I'm not a financial advisor at all, but I truly do believe that. So for me personally, I believe dollar cost averaging in Bitcoin, and I believe in learning how to earn passive income with cryptocurrency. People say, how much Bitcoin do I need to own? Even if you own one Bitcoin, and I discussed this in detail on this video, and I'll link it above, I'll put it on the end screen. But even if you own one Bitcoin or a fraction of a Bitcoin, it doesn't matter. Bitcoin is going up, ladies and gentlemen. No question about it. I believe in learning how to earn a passive income with cryptocurrency. I discussed that in our Crypto Passive Profits course. If you want a sneak piece on what, by the way, this course has exploded. Just a week or so ago, we had 40-something members. Now we're at 74. If you want to join the growth, join the group, I'll put a link down in the description. But what you can do is you can actually take a sneak peek, watch the video, learn more, multiple streams of passive crypto income. This is kind of a sneak peek of what we discuss inside of our members area, or inside of our course, our Crypto Passive Profits course. Hey, thank you so much for watching today, ladies and gentlemen. Just a quick recap. Government spending is out of control. There is no way that it will become under control. It's only going to continue to speed up exponentially. That is going to devalue the US dollar. Fractional reserve banking will simply add to the lack of faith in the government currency. It's going to simply undermine it. And it will actually help increase the speed of inflation as banks need bailouts. The only way to protect the consumer, us as individuals, the only way for us to not be taken advantage of by our government policies, monetary policies, and the banking systems that we're a part of, our only solution, in my opinion, is to be able to hold some sort of hard asset. In my opinion, not financial advice, is more and more people are going to see Bitcoin as a solution to that problem. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't done so already, join the Crypto Wealth crew, hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, ladies and gentlemen. Decentralized cryptocurrency equals freedom, and now you know why. This is Crypto Wealth. I'm out.